floor. Let's listen.
Voted to avoid this. A bipartisan majority voted to advance a non-controversial bill that already passed the House and which the President has already said he'll sign. Of course, like any compromise, this funding bill cannot be all things to all people, but this bipartisan bill does what we need to do right now. It ends this pointless, irresponsible shutdown, funds the government for our troops, our veterans, and millions of vulnerable Americans, and extends health coverage for millions of children in low-income families. None of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle can point to a single thing in the bill that they oppose, not one thing. That's why a bipartisan majority voted for it last night. It would have passed smoothly and been sent for the President's signature, except that the Democratic leader took the extraordinary step of filibustering this bipartisan bill and initiating his own government shutdown. Why? Well, because, he explains, the President would not give him everything he wants on the issue of illegal immigration in one afternoon in the Oval Office. That's it. That's it. Leaders from both parties have spent months negotiating long-term fixes for immigration policy, government spending, and other important priorities. Senators on both sides want a bipartisan solution to DACA and other immigration issues. Senators on both sides want long-term funding for our troops. Bipartisan, bicameral negotiations on these matters have been underway for months. Here's the difference between the Democratic leader and the rest of us tonight. The difference. He wants to keep the government shut down for hundreds of millions of Americans until we finish negotiating on the subject of illegal immigration. Wants to keep the government shut down until we finish a negotiation on the subject of illegal immigration. Shutting down the government over illegal immigration. Look, those discussions on the immigration issue continue. We don't have to shut down funding for our veterans, military families, opioid centers, or anyone else who relies on the federal government over the issue of illegal immigration. The occupant of the chair is one of the people involved in that very subject. There's a lot of interest around here on both sides of the aisle in dealing with it. But it's not an emergency. All of these other issues, which are affected by the government shutdown, are emergencies, particularly the children's health care issue. Look, the American people know what's going on here. They got this figured out. A survey this week shows that a majority of Americans say funding the government is more important than passing legislation on DACA. Legislation, by the way, that doesn't really exist and which the Democratic leader cannot present to us. We hear a lot of talk about it, but we haven't seen it. Fewer than half of Democrats, in this poll I'm talking about, fewer than half of Democrats say that dealing with DACA is more urgent than keeping the government open. And these numbers came in before Americans picked up their newspapers this morning. When they did, they read from the Associated Press exactly who is responsible for this chaos. From the AP, Democrats blocked a 4-week stopgap extension in a late-night vote, causing the fourth government shutdown in a quarter of a century. You might say they pinned the tail on the donkey. The New York Times, not exactly a bastion of right-wing sentiment, put the blame exactly where it belongs. Senate Democrats blocked passage of a stopgap spending bill to keep the government open. Now, Mr. President, Senate Republicans remain ready and eager to end this totally manufactured crisis. This is not a crisis. It's a manufactured crisis. We voted to avoid it entirely in our bipartisan vote last night. We're ready to vote again. All the country needs is for the Democratic leader to withdraw his filibuster and let a bipartisan majority pass this bill and reopen the United States government. Earlier today, I asked for consent to move up a vote on this bipartisan solution and to end the craziness today. Democrats objected. That won't work forever. If they continue to object, we cannot proceed to a cloture vote until 1 a.m. on Monday, but I assure you we will have the vote at 1 a.m. on Monday unless there's a desire to have it sooner. In the meantime, shutdowns have consequences. The Democratic leader may be playing for political points, but the rest of us understand that the readiness of our armed forces, health coverage for poor children, and survivor benefits for the families of fallen service members are the farthest thing from a game. Playing with all of those lives over the issue of illegal immigration. Congress has a lot of work to do. We need to provide for our warfighters, secure the border, resolve the DACA issue, continue work on health care, and attend to many other key priorities. I want to move forward on all these issues. And we can when the Democratic leader's filibuster comes to an end. Because these talks are only being delayed, not advanced, but delayed by the Democrats' filibuster and the Democratic shutdown it has created. So I want to assure the American people we'll be right back at this tomorrow. Say again to the American people, we'll be right back at this tomorrow and for as long as it takes. We'll keep at this until Democrats end their extraordinary filibuster of government funding and children's health care and allow a bipartisan majority of senators to reopen the federal government for all Americans and to get Congress back on track. The Democratic leader may put his personal political priorities ahead of everything else, no matter the cost, but Republicans stand with the American people.
President.